Hi Anjani. So
I am
thanks for agreeing to help out our students on the newly notified area of law on corporate social responsibility. Before we get down to the subject, will you be able to just give us a overview of your practice and qualifications and your
okay.
association even with CSR if possible? You know how you have been helping companies with it.
Yes. Uh, so as far I'm a chartered accountant, and I've been practicing as a chartered accountant for the last 4 5 years now. And as far as my experience with CSR and NGOs is concerned, I've been working with a lot of NGOs. I'm also a faculty with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India for their post-qualification courses on expertise in NPOs. And very recently, I've been working, delivering lectures and seminars on CSR and other issues, helping out companies
Wonderful.
in and framing the policies with regards to the implementation, and also with regards to the NGOs to help them have a strong reporting system so that the CSR initiatives can be implemented through them as an implementing agencies.
All right. So I'll just ask you for a quick overview. When this law was notified, what
Hmm.
were there any pre-existing guidelines? I think there were some voluntary guidelines released by MCA, I
Right.
believe, which were applicable. So now, what is the framework basically? Just if you can give an overview. And after notification of the new act, what kinds of entity? How many entities are caught within the ambit of mandatory CSR?
Okay. See, first of all, let me just give you a small build-up. When it comes to CSR, uh, a country like India, CSR is nothing new. I mean, if you take the recent legal framework as well, so yes, there were voluntary guidelines. There were certain things in the clauses which had been mentioned, where the companies were supposed to spend certain amount on social activities. It was more of a voluntary spend rather than making it a statutory requirement under any statute. But
Right.
even when you go back, if you see the history of the country, philanthropy has always been a part of it. So if you consider India as a country, then the Indians, our the heritage has come in such a manner that there have been three types of charity which people usually do here. So they were broadly classified into three categories, which was Dan, Dakshina, and Bhiksha. So Dakshina
Okay.
was something which was always given for exchange of something. Bhiksha was something which was given for your own enlightenment. And Dan was the purest form of charity which was done without expecting something in return. If you
Right.
see the recent past, then Indian corporates like Birlas and Tatas, they have been, in fact, spending much more than the 2% threshold, which has now been notified by the Section 135 of the Companies Act 2013.
All right.
So
How much have
that's
they been spending?
so these people have been spending more than that. If you see the spend goes around 3 to 4%. In fact, even at sometimes it's 5% of what has been done.
Okay.
Because they have been spending a lot. Tata has been spending by its own foundation, which is Dorabji Tata Foundation, which has been set up. Birla again has its own foundation. In fact, the very recently revamped FICCI auditorium and the FICCI and ASSOCHAM has been an initiative of Birla. So now if
Okay.
I take the notification which was brought in, and if I take the section 135 of Companies Act 2013, then one thing is that it gives me immense proud to say that India is the only country in the world right now who has a statutory compliance which enumerates CSR as a statutory activity. You have certain voluntary guidelines which are available in countries like UK, Germany, France, etc. But those are only voluntary guidelines. India now is being the only country in the first country in the world which has come up with a statutory compliance. So the thing is that right now, after this guideline has come in, which again, let me just give you a small overview. As per Section 135, there are eligible companies. That is, CSR responsibilities would be applicable on companies which fall under the specification as laid down in subsection 1 of Section 135. So there are three
Right.
conditions. The conditions have an or between them. So either the companies can have a net worth of 500 crores, they can have a net profit of 5 crores, or they can have a turnover of 1000 crores. If any of the three can be 10,000 crores of turnover. So if any of the three is fulfilled, then they are supposed to spend 2% of the average net profits of the last 3 years for
Right.
CSR activity.
So we are
Because of
considering turnover, profits, and
so first is the turnover,
Right.
then it's the profits, and then it's the net worth. Net worth is 500 crores.
Okay.
Okay.
So net worth is basically capital plus reserves.
Right.
Got it.
So now, because of this thing, the eligible companies in CSR after this, as per the IICA standards, as per the IICA numbers, there are around 16,358 companies which are eligible. So there are 16,358 eligible companies. There is
Eligible
more than
companies means these are the ones that have to conduct
yes,
CSR?
yes. Yes, so these are the
They
ones
have.
they
Mhm.
have to spend 2% of their net profits on CSR,
Okay, okay,
which is a huge number. And now there would be more than 20,000 crore which would be available for the CSR activities.
okay,
If you see the NGOs in India, there are more than 33 lakh NGOs which are registered in India. Now, out
okay,
of those 33 lakh NGOs, there are around 10 lakh effective NGOs in India. That is the NGOs which are working, which are doing some work.
okay,
So technically, if you just take a small data, then approximately the absorptive capacity of one NGO in India is around 20 lakh per annum. So that infers that you have around 1 lakh NGOs which are right now ready to implement the CSR funds or money which is for the disposal
okay.
right now.
Could you repeat this point on the absorptive capacity?
So I'm saying that if you take an average, so for example, if there's an NGO in India, it's registered, it's an eligible NGO.
Right.
So they have an absorptive capacity of 20 lakh per annum. So that is the
What does that
majority.
mean?
Absorptive capacity means that they get donations worth 20 lakhs, so it's basically their revenue cycle. So
Okay,
in
okay,
20 lakhs grants, they can do the work they are doing right now.
okay,
So this way, it's like 20,000 crores is up for grabs to 1 lakh NGOs, which are eligible and which are up for grabs for this kind of an initiative.
okay. Out of the 10 lakh effective NGOs, you are saying that only 1 lakh of them are actually
No, so I'm
in
saying
a
that out of
position.
the 10 lakh, if you divide the 20,000 crores, if you say that 20 lakh is a decent
Okay,
amount
okay,
of
okay.
consumption, then
20
it's
lakh.
1 lakh,
Right,
which is
right.
right.
Okay. So assuming that 20 lakh is given per NGO.
Yeah, assuming that's just a broad assumption classification
Right,
which you
right. Got it. So, um, assuming that these thresholds are met for a
right.
company, the total 2% outlay would amount to how much? Have you ever done that calculation? That's interesting because the idea came to me when you suggested 20 lakhs is the absorptive capacity, of one NGO.
Right.
So I was just thinking that, minimum outflow would be
So
2% of
the
net. Yeah,
estimate is 20,000 crores. That's why that's the estimate. So we
yeah,
say around 20,000 crore would be available as the 2% of all the eligible
right,
companies. That would be
right.
around 20,000 crores.
Okay. Uh, all right. I wanted to move on then to the issues on how CSR responsibilities are implemented. So,
Right.
what is the role of the board, and what is the role of any of the CSR committee, which is required to be created as per the
Absolutely.
Companies Act? So, we
Right.
earlier had the audit committee and remuneration committee. These used to be traditionally there, right?
Right.
Now we have, I believe, a CSR committee, and are there other committees that the new Companies Act is requiring?
No, so right now, from the perspective of CSR, it's a compulsion that you need to have a CSR committee in place. The
Right.
CSR committee will consist of three members. So
Okay.
it will have three members, and one of the members would be an independent director, independent member. So
Okay.
just to bring in that independence and transparency in the spending of the fund. The functions of the CSR committee has been broadly decided in the rules as well. So the functions of the CSR committee would be to make a budget, to draft a policy of a CSR policy, and then to recommend this policy to the board.
1 second. Let's just repeat this. So there would be an independent director who should be appointed to the CSR committee.
Right, right. So there would be three members. First thing, there would be three members in this committee, and
Okay.
one of the members would be an independent director.
Okay. Anjani,
Okay.
your face is being cut by the camera. If you could just move the. Uh,
Right
yeah,
now?
yeah, yeah, yeah. This is perfect. Perfect. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there would be three members. One would be an independent director. Now, let me just take you deeper into the provision. The thing here is that there are certain companies which are private companies and there are certain companies which are unlisted companies, companies which are
Right.
not listed on any of the stock exchanges. Now, there are such companies which are also falling under the purview of CSR. So there are companies who have a net worth
I
of
just
50.
lost you there. I think there was an internet connection problem. Just one
Yes,
second. Suddenly there was an internet connection problem. So yeah. So after, so there are private companies and there are unlisted public companies.
right.
From there, if you could continue.
Yes. So there are certain companies which are private companies and there are certain companies which are unlisted companies and they do fall under the purview of CSR. That is, they are under a compulsion to spend that 2%. For these companies, that one member who should be an independent member is not a compulsion. So these companies can still have a CSR committee, and especially in the case of private companies where you usually have two, the minimum threshold is two directors. So if a
Hmm.
private company has two directors, then they can go ahead with the CSR committee having just two members on that committee. So this is
And they
one.
don't need an independent director.
Yes, no requirement of an independent directors if it's a private company and an unlisted company.
Okay. Okay.
This is one kind of an exemption which is given to these companies,
Okay.
right?
Uh,
So
right.
now coming to the roles and responsibility of the committee, why the committee is important.
Yeah.
So
And what is the role of the board after that? Now, once they constitute the committee, does the board have any role
yes,
in
so let's
in the?
first understand what the committee has to do. So the
Yes.
committee A, they have to first draft a policy. That would be your CSR policy.
Right.
Second, they would have a budget and a strategy of implementation,
Right.
right? Third, they will have to have an expenditure detail to it. Fourth,
Right.
they will be recommending this to the board. Now, this is where the board comes in.
Okay.
So now the board's responsibility is to number one, give a green signal to the policy which has been drafted by the committee. If there are
Right.
any suggestions, changes they would want, they can suggest that.
Right.
Once the policy is approved, so board has to approve the policy. Once the policy is approved, this policy has to be published on the website of the company.
Right.
So this is a mandatory rule. Now, even if, so this also infers that if there is a company which does not have a website, they will have to have a website and they will have to publish this policy online.
They will have to create a website to publish the
Yes, they
policy
have to.
just for that
If the company
purpose.
have a website. So this infers because since the policy has to be put on a website, so if you don't have a
Yeah.
website, then automatically the website requirement is there.
Right, but today most companies, at least which are operating on that scale, would like to have an online presence. At least, their corporate side would be there where they'll list and say what they do. They'll just have that listing, even if they don't, deliver any goods or services on the internet. So I'm guessing that much is all right.
Irrespective of the fact whether the site is down or how friendly that website is, but there would be a domain name and there would be a web page which is always there. So
Okay,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
this thing is there, and then so basically they need to have a website, and this is where the board comes in. Now, when you were asking me what role the board has to play, so
Right,
once you have made a committee, it does not mean that the board will not have any kind of a responsibility after that. Uh, the
okay,
reporting under CSR, which I believe we'll take it later on. So the reporting under CSR would be taken under section 134. There's a clause O in that. So where you would have to report certain things in CSR. Any kind of ambiguity, any kind of negligence which comes in, the board and each and every officer of the board is responsible for that.
right.
So CSR, the committee basically has more of an executive function or power to rather try and execute the functions of the CSR. But ultimately, the answerability or the authority and the accountability it stays with the board.
Okay, interesting.
Right.
So that I think it completes the discussion on the role of the board.
Yes.
What about the So at a practical level now, what are the challenges that are faced, when making a CSR allocation? So there are two ways of doing CSR, right? One is that the company can itself engage in the activity that forms the subject matter of CSR. The other
Yes.
is that it could finance a CSR activity.
Uh,
Correct.
yes. So basically, the three ways of doing it.
Okay.
The first way is that you do it yourself. You can start an activity where you can have your employees volunteering part time, or you can have other volunteers who are there, and an activity can be undertaken. Now,
Right.
just to give you a clarity, the CSR, when we talk about Section 135, it is imperative that we also talk about the Schedule 7, which comes in the rule. So in
Correct.
Schedule 7, there are 10 broad clauses. In the 10 clauses, they have enumerated the activities which qualify as CSR activity. So these
Right.
activities primarily are charitable activities in nature. They can be medication for poor, there are preventive health services, there are education, then there is protection of monuments, heritage properties, upliftment of rural games, etc. So these are some of the examples which I'm just sharing with you.
Right.
So the company can undertake any of these activities which have been enumerated in Schedule 7 of the Companies Act 2013 for its CSR initiative. To carry on the CSR initiative, the CSR initiative carried on by three ways. The first one is that it can do it on its own. The second
Right.
is that the company can incorporate or float or promote its own NGO. And it can be a trust, it can be a society, or it can be a company registered under Section 8 of the Companies Act 2013. So these
Right.
are the ways under which it can do it. The third way is that it can also do a partnership. There can be a pooling of resources between two companies.
Okay.
Okay, so if provided the reporting can be segregated, so you have to report it in a separate manner, but this can be undertaken. Now the only
But
catch is that when
one
you
second.
do
Sorry to interrupt you. Isn't there a possibility of even making a financial contribution to an independent NGO?
yes,
You
there is
didn't
of
get
course.
that right.
Yes, so the
Yeah.
second category we had discussed, either they can do it by incorporating or promoting or forming their own NGOs, or they can do it by an NGO which already exists, provided that NGO is in existence for the last 3 years and it has the experience of doing the work in that area for which you have chosen the CSR. So
Correct.
this is one prerequisite which you require for that NGO. It has to be in existence for 3 years, and it should have an experience of 3 years in that particular area where you are considering your CSR initiative.
All right.
Right.
Now, how do we? What are the challenges that the board will face in engaging in deciding allocation for a CSR activity? See, when they are doing it on their own or floating their own NGO, it's pretty clear. But
Right.
what if they are doing it, they want to allocate money to another NGO?
Right. So if you just speak the technicals, then if they want to allocate it to any NGOs, I've told you first they should meet the NGOs should meet that threshold. That is, they are 3 years old and they have an experience in that kind of an NGO, that kind of a
And they
CSR.
must be NGOs because no for-profit vehicles, even if they are dedicated to any of these purposes, are allowed. The law
No,
says that they must be an NGO, right?
they have to be NGOs. They have to be NGOs. They have
Right,
to be NGOs and they have to be NGOs which are under existence for 3 years.
right,
So initially, when I was telling you that there are around out of the 33 lakh, there are around 10 lakh NGOs which are eligible. So these are the 10 lakh eligible NGOs.
right.
Right. So they should be under in an existence for 3 years, and they should have an experience in that kind of an area of CSR initiative which you have decided.
All right,
Now the company can give the money of CSR either as a corpus donation, or it can be given like as a designated fund. There are two things which can be done.
right. So it will be good if you can explain these methods.
Right. So basically, the difference is that an NGO in India can receive money as donation. So the money it receives as donations is that either it can receive it as donations or it can receive it as memberships. And in certain places, it also receives as the money given for the services offered. Let's not go deeper into it. Let's talk about the donation. So when the donations are received, the donations can be received as corpus donations. Now, corpus donations are given with just a specific direction that whatever money I'm giving will be forming a part of the corpus. And such sums or funds can be retained by the NGOs for a longer period of time and they can be spent after a longer time.
And
Then
for
you can
any
have
of the purposes of the NGO, typically.
yes, so that forms the corpus, and corpus is something which goes on for a longer time, and the NGO usually spends the corpus to fulfill its objects. Now, apart from the corpus, you receive donations with certain specific directions. When I say specific directions, so
Right.
they come with a specified activity. For example, for instance, if I am a company and I am giving a donation to an NGO and I say that you need to spend only for the activities which
One
have been
second.
mentioned in this
Anjani, can you
document.
repeat this part, huh, about the donation because we suddenly had a lag in bandwidth.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it fine now?
Yeah.
So
About this,
if there is any
about the
donation,
designated function bit, designated fund bit.
yes, so designated funds are funds given to an NGO for a specified purpose.
Right.
For a specific purpose. When a fund is given for a specified purpose, it becomes a designated fund. So, for example, my CSR initiative is to look after the monuments and heritage property in and around Delhi, and I engage an NGO which is doing that work for the last 3 years, and now I give the donation specifying in clear terms that this is why I'm giving you the funds. That is, a specific purpose has been specified. This becomes a designated fund.
Okay. Can we have an
Wherein if
example?
So that's for example, I just give a designated fund and I say that to NGO XYZ, I am giving the company Private Limited or ABC Limited is in it under its CSR initiative. We have a CSR policy, and under the policy, we have decided that we will take care of all the heritage properties and monuments which have been notified by the Archaeological Society of India as heritage properties, and we would be our CSR spend would be going on these monuments, and so therefore we are providing you this money, and your job would be to undertake this on behalf of this thing and whatever term sheet
So
which you have in
okay,
books.
okay. So this is a
So this is
designated fund.
absolutely. So this is, actually the thing is that there are certain ambiguous provisions which have come in. So there are certain gray areas which the statute has left, and we are still waiting for certain clarifications. And I believe it will only come down in practice because there are no certain precedences because it's a new statute that they have been clarified. So if you start with, for example, if I speak about the ambiguous areas, one of them is the donation and corpus. So this is one of the areas which I believe has also a gray area attached to it.
So one question, Anjani, what is practically the difference? I mean, I got the difference in terms of the meaning of a corpus donation versus a designated fund. But
Right.
for practical purposes, does this have this has some legal implications in the sense that this has a
Absolutely.
condition, okay, but accounting perspective wise or what is the implication of this distinction?
So when you speak about the implication, as I told you, corpus donation is something, a donation or a fund which comes with a specific direction, not for a specific purpose. When it comes with
Right,
a specific direction that it form a part of, specific direction is that it will form a part of corpus. That's a
right,
specific direction.
right,
When it comes as a specific direction, as a corpus fund, the NGO can retain that money for a longer duration of time. That is, if I get a corpus fund today,
right,
not
right,
necessarily I have to, it's like a capital contribution.
right.
So let
But
me just simplify.
I got
I
it.
can use it,
Hmm.
I can use it over a period of time.
Hmm.
Okay. When you speak about CSR, in CSR we say that 2% of the average net profits of the last 3 years have to be spent in that current year.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's take a hypothetical example. I say that my CSR initiative was say 100 crores. 2% is 100 crores.
Okay.
Okay. Now out of this 100 crores, I am giving 50 crores to an NGO as the corpus donation.
Right. And that has not been spent out.
Now the NGO has retained that 50 crores,
Yeah.
right? As per section 135 and as per schedule 7, I have given it to an NGO which is already undertaking an activity which forms a part of schedule 7 activity. Therefore,
Correct.
it is a CSR activity for me. In my policy, it is already mentioned, very clearly mentioned. Since it is an eligible NGO, I am giving that 50 crores to that NGO. But technically, that money would be retained by the NGO and it would be spent in the times to come, in not that particular year. Now,
Correct. Correct.
as a company, what should I show? Because as per the act, it shows that the moment you have given a corpus donation, it amounts to expenditure. So in my books
Right.
of account, in the books of account of the company, it amounts as an expenditure. Number one, that's one of the implications. The second implication. The second implication is the moment I give it for with a specific purpose, then it becomes a designated fund. Then it's no
Right.
more a corpus. Okay. Now a designated fund creates a fiduciary relationship. It creates a fiduciary liability on the NGO which is receiving
Right.
it.
Correct.
Right. So what happens is For me, it is like an advance which I am giving. So for in the company's balance sheet, in the company's books of account, it will stand as an asset. And
Right.
in the books of accounts of an NGO, it will stand as a liability because it comes with a specific purpose to it. Till the time the NGO doesn't fulfill that purpose, it will keep standing as a liability.
Okay, so in one case, it will be an asset for the company and a liability for the
Right.
NGO.
Right. So
Uh,
there would be complications with regards to the presentation. There would be
but
complications
the
with
money
regards.
is not supposed to be returned, so it's not a financial liability. It's an obligation. It's a contract.
It's
It's
a,
like a
it's
contractual
absolutely
obligation where
right
the
word.
NGO has to
So
do something.
it's a contractual obligation which has been created at both ends.
Right.
At both ends. So because there's a fiduciary obligation which has been created, now I am under an obligation that since I've given the designated funds, I need to have the proper statements from the NGO that where have you spent that account. At the same time, the NGO will keep the designated funds as a liability in its books of accounts, and as and when it keeps expending it, that fund will keep decreasing.
Right. Got it.
Right. So there are certain contradictions which are happening, and not just this. I'll give you a small example. Now the section 135 says that a CSR initiative can be something, any activity which is enumerated in Schedule 7 of the Act.
Right.
At the same time, the companies, the MCA, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, has also come out. They have come up with the CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility rules. When you read the rules, the CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility, has been defined under in Rules 2C in the rules of CSR. When you read
Right.
those rules, the first line which reads is that CSR is any activity not limited to Schedule 7. So when I say not limited to, that means it can be any other charitable activity which has not been enumerated in Schedule 7 at this point of time or at this moment, but it
Right.
can
Right.
also be a CSR.
Right.
So again, there's a contradiction between what has been given in the Act in Section 135 and what has been enumerated in the rules. So if I
Correct.
undertake anything which is a charitable activity, but it does not form a part of Schedule 7, then there can be a chance. There can, in the previous, there are certain judicial precedents where, on a case by case basis, the courts have decided whether it qualifies to be a charitable activity or not. So,
Yeah. Correct.
according to that, if what I do is a charitable activity, but it is not enumerated in Schedule 7, then does that mean that the rule can supersede the act, or the act will supersede the rule? So there are ambiguities which are there, which has to be clarified by the MC as soon as possible. The third bit, the very important ambiguity is with regards to the expenditure. The bit is that 2% of it is a CSR, that is the expenditure is 2%. What would be the
Right.
tax implication on this 2%? Whether this 2% of the expenditure would be allowable to me in my profit and loss account?
Right.
If it is allowable to me, which section will they allow me this 2%? Because it is not included in section 37(1) of the Income Tax Act. It does
One.
not form part as a business expenditure.
Right. Right.
Although it's a mandatory expenditure which has been made a mandate under a statute, but the suitable clarification has to be brought in, not only in the Companies Act 2013, but also in the other ancillary acts or the acts which are there. For example, the Income Tax Act 1961. There have to be
I
certain
didn't got this
clarifications.
point. 1 second, Anjani. So when the act said that there is 2% which needs to be allocated to CSR, there was a doubt of whether this can be a deductible business expense or not under Section 37.
Right,
So when there is a clarification post the budget, I believe that this is not a deductible expenditure. So after that,
right.
it's pretty clear that then what is the further clarification we are waiting for? That's
The further clarification is that since what is being done is a charitable activity, does the company get, for example, I have now contributed certain amount to an NGO to its corpus fund. The
right.
moment I do it, I'm eligible to donation under section. I'm eligible for the exemption under section 80G of the income
Yes.
tax.
Yes.
Do I get that exemption or not?
Ordinarily, you should, right?
Right.
If the organization is registered under Section 12A, then
Yes.
you should get ATG, right?
So ATG, 12A as well as ATG. The organization
Yeah.
should also be registered under section 80G to get that exemption.
Right.
Now, if you move on, there another which I believe is again a big ambiguity is that there are certain companies in India, including ICICI, including HDFC, including Infosys, etc. These are companies which have majority of their shareholdings being held by foreign,
Non-resident.
right?
Yeah.
They come under the definition of foreign companies.
Right.
Now, CSR is also eligible, is also applicable on foreign companies in India. Okay. The only difference is the only, one of the exception is that the CSR activity or the initiative has to be undertaken in India. No CSR activity undertaken outside India will be eligible as a CSR expenditure. Now the
Correct.
ambiguity which comes in is that whatever is being given, because these companies like ICICI, etc., they also come under the FCRA provision,
Right.
FCRA Act 2010.
Right.
So as per the FCRA Act, no contribution can be given to any NGO if it does not have an FCRA registration by any company, any foreign company, or any other NGO which is receiving foreign contribution.
Can you explain this loop again? So yeah, these companies in India which have foreign ownership will qualify as foreign
So
sources,
yeah,
right?
so they will fall under FCRA. They will,
Right,
because it's a
because they
foreign
are foreign
country.
sources for donating money.
Yes.
So
So
if they are
now what
donating
happens?
money to an Indian business, the CSR
Right.
obligation is applicable, but they need to be compliant with FCRA.
They need to be compliant with FCRA. Now, the FCRA rule states that if any NGO or any entity which receives FCRA, which receives foreign contribution,
Right.
can further give this foreign contribution to NGOs in India, provided these NGOs have a prior FCRA registration with them.
Why is the question of on, this is like an on lending, right? Why is trickle down is happening? Why talking trickle down in this case?
So now the thing is that since ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, just giving a couple of examples, these
Right.
are these are companies which come under FCRA because of the foreign holding and the foreign registration.
Right.
Now the question is, if these companies are giving 2% of their average net profit of the last 3 years, or any
Right.
amount of that for CSR initiative to an NGO which does not have an FCRA registration.
There's a problem.
So I cannot say
Yeah.
there's a problem, but they have not clarified this area in FCRA. They have not clarified this
So
area
they
in
need,
FCRA.
so if it counts as a foreign donation, then they will need a specific permission or they will need a standing registration under FCRA.
So the NGOs, see, as per FCRA, if any NGO gets funds under FCRA,
Right.
okay, so there are NGOs which get funds from both. They get funds from Indian donors as well as FCRA. Now
Right.
let's take an NGO which is getting fund from NGO from Indian donors and they are also getting funds from foreign donors and they are
Right.
registered under FCRA. Now this NGO, if it wants to donate any further amount to any NGO, irrespective of the source, once it is covered
Right.
under FCRA, after that, if this NGO wants to donate any money to any other Indian NGO, that other
Right.
Indian NGO needs to have an FCRA registration with it.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
You cannot later on go and argue that, say, I gave it from my Indian donations. You can't say that. It has to be registered under FCRA. So in this particular case, when an ICICI bank or an HDFC bank or any other company which falls under similar criteria, if they give it to an NGO which does not have an FCRA, what would be the repercussions? So these have not been
Right.
clarified as of now in the FCRA Act 2010. So I
Okay.
believe we might see something of this sort. And
Okay.
then I think the last one, because when we had discussed that there would be one independent director in the board, what I believe is that independence is also very important. So one area where I believe that there can be certain more regulations or certain stringent measures can be taken is the independence of the board. So
Right.
the idea is that they have ensured that there should be one independent directors in the committee, CSR committee.
One
But
independent director.
there has been no notification. At the same time, they also say that the company can incorporate or promote its own NGO or a trust and can undertake the CSR initiative under that NGO. That
Right.
NGO which the company initiates needs not to be 3 years old. So the company can incorporate an NGO in the same year and then it can actually undertake
Correct.
the.
Correct. Correct.
At the same time, they do not talk about the act is silent on the independence of the board of trustees of that kind of an NGO. See, this is a very important sector because I can be a company and I can give corpus donations. So that way, I
Right.
can actually transfer a lot of money to a trust which I have made, which will have my own board members because it never says that the NGO will have independent members, and
No.
I can actually make a huge corpus that way, which the benefits can be taken on in the years. So I think this is one area which needs to be addressed when it comes to the independence.
Okay, so you are saying that there can be a large corpus donation made to an NGO which is incorporated by the company itself and which
Yes.
has directors also who are who may not be independent trustees.
Right. Because
And
there's no notification.
right. So that's like not that's like parking your money somewhere without
Yes.
really doing any CSR.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. I had another question on the tax issues. Is there anything around sections 30 to 35, 30 to 35, which or 36, which allows, which covers any CSR related activity?
No, so you do have certain research and developments. You do have certain amounts which you spend on R&Ds, on expenditure which you are spending on population control, birth control, etc. R&D on
Okay.
science and technologies. There. These expenditure are there, but again, these are they also form part of the business expenditure. For example, if a
Right.
company is researching in medicines, etc. So therefore, a notification was also brought in by the health ministry as well,
Okay.
and by the MC as well, that if certain amount is being expended by companies which are indulged in pharmaceuticals, so
Right.
they can only benefit if there is free medicine which is being provided to poor and free medical facilities being provided to poor. Only
Under the
then,
CSR provision.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So if they are expending this money on research, etc., and showing this as a CSR expense, it will not be counted as if they are selling the medicines.
No. So this cannot be. Apart from
Okay.
this, if they are actually giving certain medicine, so what they are doing as per the business expenditure is different. But apart from this, if they are actually providing free medicine to the poor, then that can be allowed as a CSR initiative.
Right, right, right. Okay. Uh, Now I had some question on how CSR activities were being taxed earlier. Firstly, okay, so what are the limitations on CSR activities? We were discussing what activities are included within CSR. Certain
Hmm.
activities are excluded, such as employee activities which are exclusively for the benefits of employees, right?
Hmm.
Or their family members. Can we
Uh,
discuss this in a
so
little more detail? Yes.
they have restricted that to 5% of the total CSR spent. There can be
Okay.
capacity building and there can be employee welfare exercises which can be done by the company,
Right.
restricted to 5% of the total spend of the CSR which is permissible. That there
Okay.
has been a tab on
Okay.
that. There's a
Okay.
tab.
But this limitation is only for active actions which are 100%, exclusively for employee benefits.
Right,
Only
right.
then there is this cap. Because if
Only
you see otherwise, companies have made parks, they've made roads, they've made entire cities,
right.
and employees are enjoying those benefits. It's just that because those benefits are spilling over to the other residents of the city as well, they are counted as CSR.
Yeah,
But strategically, their
absolutely.
own employees are benefiting. Companies' profitability might also increase in the long term.
Absolutely, absolutely. In the same time, see when if you see the act properly, so what happens is in the act they've also given certain guidelines in the rules, and they say that you should try and choose a local area. A company should try and choose the local area for the development. So that way they are ensuring that wherever the company is doing its business, they
Right.
also that social responsibility in the local area is fulfilled. Okay. So when you speak about
Okay.
the local area, and if you actually break it down, then in the local area, if it's a big company, then there are a lot of employees who are staying in that local area. If a
Right.
Tata is functioning in Jamshedpur, majority of them are Tata employees, or or a Jagdishpur where Birla employees are there, or Pilani where Birla employees are there. So that way, yes, there are employees who will be benefiting with these activities. But then exclusively for employee benefit, it's 5%, or for
Okay.
capacity building of the
Okay.
employees, it's 5%. And as
Now
far as
one question.
you're saying the
Right.
limitations not being covered,
Sorry,
I
could you
believe
please
once again,
repeat this?
pardon?
Could you please repeat? Yeah. What are you saying?
Yeah. So as you were just stating that if we discuss those areas, there are certain things which have not been perhaps covered by in Schedule 7 of the
Okay.
Companies Act in this thing.
Okay.
So if you speak about that once again, I believe that that particular provision in the rules, when they say that it is not limited to Schedule 7, I believe that not limited to has been introduced so that there can be certain charitable activities which have been missed out during the drafting of the act can be incorporated into it. So I believe, see, we need to understand the essence behind the entire act. The essence is to make it a mandate and to encourage companies to spend more and more on social responsibilities, etc.
Right.
If you the
So you are
government
saying
spends.
that it might not be interpreted so strictly. Like usually the rule
Yes,
is that a rule
right,
cannot violate the act. But in
right.
this case, because the intention is to encourage companies to go out and spend on social welfare, it might
Right.
not be so strict, so
It
strictly
might be.
interpreted by courts.
If it's a genuine charitable expenditure, I believe it will be allowed.
Yes, yes. And court jurisprudence is very evolved on what is charitable and what is not. So they'll be able
Yeah.
to decide on that.
Yes, they would be able to. And if you, for example, on 15th of August, the Prime Minister, when he was delivering his speech, he had made an appeal that building of toilets in the schools shall be included as one of the, and he had appealed the corporates
Okay.
to take this activity. So
Wow.
somewhere even the government is sending signals, that build toilets, even that becomes an initiative from that perspective. So I believe
Right,
they are
right.
flexible with it, and they would be making it more holistic. They would be including more and more activities which can be charitable in the larger scheme of things.
Okay. Uh, so other questions were pertaining to taxation.
Right,
Uh, Before the clarification that this 2% mandatory spend would not be included as business development expenditure, before that, if we look at the case law, what we see is more or less a unanimous, a consistent view that this is business expenditure. That's
right,
what courts have held. They have said that, business has to be seen in the larger scheme of things. You have to understand that a business wants to be viewed responsibly by the by the society and not just its customers, and its reputation depends on its CSR also, and its
right,
reputation will improve its profits. Therefore, this is a business expenditure. That is what
absolutely.
the courts have held. Now, with the coming in now 2% on the statutory 2%, you cannot have any
Right,
deductions. That has been clarified. However, this leaves an open area for two kinds of expenses. One is expenditure in excess of 2%. Will we apply the old case law again to that? That is one question. And second, there is voluntary CSR still happening by companies which don't meet the threshold. So for them, will the old law continue to apply where they take the advantage of business expenditure for CSR activities?
right. So as far as the 2% threshold and the business expenditure is concerned, it is only applicable to those companies which are covered under Section 135. So the second
Right.
question to all those companies which are voluntarily making such donations or such expenses, so they can easily take the benefit of such case laws. Because
Right.
another thing, you have also given one facet of it, that it's a social, it's basically a vicious circle. You get back from the society what you give it to it. So yes, the
Yes.
companies were under an obligation to give it. At the same time, certain courts have also observed in certain case laws which have been decided that these expenditures were a mandate in the nature of it. So they were mandated by a statute, and therefore it was
When
not something which was being done by the corporate on its own. I'm talking about the 2% compulsory contribution. In the
right.
past years, we have seen that the corporates have approached the courts for the exemption and eligibility of exemption for that. So
Mm.
one of the arguments were also these, that since they are a compulsory expenditure under a statute on which the corporate
But
doesn't have any say. So
when was
although
this
it may
made?
not fall
Because
as a
right, the compulsory expenditure requirement has been only in 2013 Companies Act. Before that, there was no compulsory requirement, right?
right,
So this
right, right.
argument hasn't come up before court.
Right. No, no. So there have been certain cases which have been pending in the tribunal, where certain companies have taken it to a tribunal, arguing that since it's a compulsory expenditure, we don't have any say on that, so it should be
Okay,
allowed. But since
okay,
you are saying that since that notification has come in, now that 2% won't be allowed. As far as the threshold is concerned, whatever you spend more than 2%.
right.
So 2% is what they have defined. But when you spend anything more than 2%,
That you may
my view,
incur.
right. So my view here is that as a corporate, if I'm getting 2% as a CSR expenses, and I'm already showing it as my CSR expenditure, anything over and above 2% which I spend, I would rather take an exemption under any other statute.
Yes.
Maybe I would rather show it as a donation, provided I don't spill over the other provisions of Companies Act, that is the 5% of the net profit, etc. And I would
Right.
rather take exemption there rather than clubbing it with the entire CSR and then perhaps going for either an advanced ruling or maybe under another kind of a judgmental issue, that whether I would be given an exemption for the money more than which exceeds 2% or not. So I believe it is more of a planning
So
issue.
later on, you can always fight it out in a court.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying that to fight it now, I will again have to expend my resources. So it's a good for chartered accountants like me and lawyers like you that they should go and fight it out in the courts. But from the
No,
planning,
but with respect to tax litigation, what you always see is, there are two ways of doing business. One is with respect to corporate litigation. Sorry, with respect to corporate law, you'll always see a transactional lawyer being conservative and taking the safer route because you don't want a transaction thrown off guard. With
right,
respect to tax
right,
litigation or tax, you always see businesses being aggressive because they want to save tax today and tomorrow. If there's a problem, they will engage an expensive lawyer to argue and save the money or an expensive
right.
CA. So
See,
that's
but
a
the problem
complete difference in approach.
the problem with Indian tax litigation system and Indian statute system has been, as there was this term very famously being used, which is known as policy paralysis and tax terrorism. Two phrases being constantly used in the past.
Right.
So what happens in India is that you later on you hire an expensive lawyer and you also end up winning that case. But suddenly the government believes that you go to the Supreme Court, the court rules in advance
Right.
of the SSE, but the government believes that they are actually they are at a loss, the revenue is at a loss. So then they come up with a retrospective amendment,
Correct. Correct.
not
Correct.
just
And
it is like a terrorist act. It's criminalized. It's very criminal to do that, and
right.
that's what
Right.
happens at every point of time. So you have numerous such cases where it be the Vodafone or it may be the ITC case which happened with the excise duty. It was the Tata's case wherein the Tatas were paying extortion money to the ultra outfits in Assam and Bengal, which they claimed as a legal. The ransom was being claimed as the legal expenses in their books of account,
Okay.
and Tata it won the case in the court that see whatever so business expenditure the section were very clear in income tax from 32 to 37 that whatever you spend for you to do the business is a business expenditure. So
Yes.
they say to operate a tea garden there, it was very important for them to pay that ransom to the ultra outfits. Otherwise, it wasn't possible for them to do the business. It was important for the welfare of the employees who were working there. So the case was pleaded. The Tata won the case, but later on, a retrospective amendment was brought into the Income Tax Act that any amount or sum which is being paid as ransom or any illegal trafficking or activity will not be allowed as a business allowance. So this
Right.
there has been
Right.
a history of bringing in retrospective amendments. Anyways, we are just drifting away to taxation now.
Right.
That's another very
Okay.
hugely this thing. So
Yeah.
I think
Right.
one area where we can now speak about is perhaps the reporting. Reporting is
Yeah.
something which
Reporting and evaluation of CSR initiatives. Can you just give me a moment? I'll just be back. Huh? Just give me a moment.
sure, sure, sure.
Hi, Anjani. Sorry for the pause. Uh, so there are three aspects left to discuss. One is the reporting.
Hmm.
Second is what should the policy contain, and how should the CSR proposals be evaluated?
Okay, right. Uh, so the first one is reporting.
Right, reporting and compliance obligations.
Reporting compliance obligation. Okay, so as far as the compliance obligation is there, so every company needs to have a CSR report which will be published again on the website. The
Every
CSR
company which is liable, which is responsible to
liability,
comply
which is
with the provision.
yes, absolutely. So from the CSR context now, when we use the word company, it
Yeah,
would be only the
correct,
eligible companies. Okay.
correct.
So the eligible companies will have to have a reporting. The reporting, the first reporting is a CSR report. So this is a detailed CSR report. The CSR report will have certain information in them. The information would be number one, the policy of the company, the CSR policy. Number two would be the constituent of the CSR committee. Number three would be the what is the average net profit of the last 3 years. Number four would be your 2% of that average net profit. Number five would be the spend which you have done. So in that spend, there's a proper table which has been shared by the MCA. They've notified a table under which so they are broad
Right,
head. So there are basically that you have spent on the expenditure was spent on say salary on this on that. This was the amount spent and this is the balance and then the cumulative total is there. So it's an entire table which you have to fill in. Number
right.
six would be any amount which is left unspent along with the reasons why. So there are chances that you had a 2% obligation, but out of that 2%, you could only spend 1.90%, and that 0.10% is still left unspent. So there have to be reasons which you have to furnish that why that 1% is being left unspent. Okay,
Okay.
and this report would be then signed by the CEO, by the chairman of the committee of the CSR. So this is one report which has to be prepared by the company, and this report will be published on their official website along with the policy of the CSR.
At
One.
what frequency this has to be
This is
prepared?
the annual report which will be there.
Would this be a section in the annual report, or is this a separate
So
report altogether?
yes, so I'm coming to that. So this is an annual report. This report would be made yearly because as I'm talking about cumulatively, although a company is at a liberty, if they want to have their own reporting standards, it is always welcome from the transparency point of view. If they want to have their own reporting standards, they are most welcome to have a small reporting. For example, they could come up with this report every quarter. Along
Okay.
with this, there are two more changes which have been brought in. The first change is in the annual return of the company. So under section 92, when you file the annual return, there is a small clause which they have inserted where you have to just give the amount of the CSR spent of the year. So there's a small clause which you have to say that the CSR spent of the company was this much. Okay.
Right.
And similarly, under Schedule 3, so basically Schedule 7 is for CSR, Schedule 3 is the broader outline where the Companies Act, it says that how you have to present your books of accounts. So
Right.
Under Schedule 3 also in the audit report, in under clause K of the audit report, you have to specify the amount which has been spent by the company for CSR. But
Right.
again, it is only the amount. So this is where I believe the reporting could have been stricter. So there is no independent audit of the CSR activity.
Okay.
So for whatever you have spent on the CSR, you don't have to have it independently audited. There will not be any kind of an independent note, and it will not be said that yes, this was the amount which was spent, and this is what the statement looks like. So even in the audit report, the statutory auditor will only mention that the CSR expenses or the amount of CSR expended by the company is 2%. So this is one area where I think there is more
Okay.
regulation required in the
Okay.
report.
But this annual report on the on CSR can be bundled along with the annual report of the company, which has other things, right?
Yes, of course, it can be.
Hmm.
It can
Right.
be bundled, but there's one compulsion which has been made and enumerated that you have to furnish it on the website.
Right. Got it.
Because I believe the intention here is that since they are encouraged to carry out CSR initiatives in the local areas, so the
Right.
moment you publish that report, people of the local areas and everywhere else can actually see it. So it automatically sets a benchmark for other people to do it, and it also sets a check mechanism on the company. So if they claim to have done something on the local area, all those people uh, who are active on that circuit, they can actually come to know. Even the NGOs who are active in the circuit, they will come to know whether such spend have been actually made or not. And
Got it.
if by any
Yeah.
chance the company is not able, it is unable to fulfill any of these, then there are certain penalties which have been enumerated in the subsection 8 of section 135. Although there are no
Right.
specific compliance issues which have been enumerated, But if you go through the Companies Act, one section, that is subsection 8 of 135, it states that if the company fails to comply with any of these provisions, then the penalty can be 50,000 rupees to 25 lakh and imprisonment up to 3 years. And this would be applicable to each and every officer who is there in the company at that point of time during the period of continuing offense.
This
The
is in section
second,
135.8.
yeah, section 135.8.
It has only 5 subsections.
No, so there's an 8 which comes in the rule again, which says that there is a penalty which has been mentioned here.
Oh, it's in
134,
the rule.
135, yes.
Right, right, I saw.
Right?
So this is on the financial reporting,
Right,
but not
financial.
on the CSR bit.
No, but again, it says that if you do not follow any of the compliances, that's what I'm saying.
Got it.
There is no specific penalty which has been this thing. But when you speak about the financial compliance not fulfilled, so it is an implied penalty that this penalty can be there. The second implied
Okay.
penalty is enumerated under section 450, which is again a
That,
holistic penalty for
right,
Act.
right. A general
So these are
penalty provision for
which can
non-compliance of any of the other provisions.
right. But they
Okay.
have not come up with any specific penalties per se for non-compliance of CSR. That is one area
Right,
where they can actually make it more
right,
stringent.
right. Can you just explain briefly what is this, how effective can joint CSR initiatives be? You said that reporting has to be separate even if there's a joint initiative. But how a joint initiative
Right.
would work? Have
A
you
joint
seen anything?
initiative
Yeah.
can work. You see, what I believe is that when you choose your local areas and if you want to do work on a larger scale, then
Right,
there are certain activities which are correlated. For example, you're working for the development of an area, you're working for the upliftment of an area, you're working for health, hygiene, and education together. So, for example,
right,
if you adopt a district, there are two companies which have adopted the same district, and so you have taken education as your CSR, and they have taken health as their CSR. Now, if they're
right,
pooling the
right,
resources, then I believe the synergies can come up with a better work. And since see, the thing is that it can save a lot of energies, the synergies can be better. Reporting has, since you have chosen your separate areas, so that will make the reporting easier,
What will
right?
make the reporting easier?
The areas, since they have been segregated and defined, so we have adopted the same district. I look after the education part of it, and you look after the health part of it.
Right, right, right,
You're the initiative. So whatever is being spent on the
right.
education is coming from my CSR initiative. Whatever is being spent on the health is coming from your CSR initiative.
Impact-wise, this is a huge difference, right?
So that way, because of the synergies coming in together, I believe that development issues per se from for each and every sector or a district will become faster this way, because you are addressing together one area with multiple shortcomings. So you are addressing the multiple shortcomings of one area. So it's a holistic development which is taking place of one particular place. The development is
Right,
faster the moment you pool in your resources.
right.
Right.
Okay, so we are just nearing the end of this session.
Right.
What are the problems? You had mentioned something about how the non-profit regulatory framework is not very strong. So if a
Right.
company wants to make a financial contribution to a non-profit, the biggest problem that it's going to face is, in evaluating which is a good non-profit. Can you please just elaborate this in more detail? I think this is very important for the students.
See, what I believe is that when you speak about there are two entities. There are two entities which are separate. It's like East is East and West is West, right?
Right,
For one entity, if you read what Milton Friedman, the famous economist, had written in one of the newspapers, that a business, the main motive of the business is to exhaust all its resources and to make as much money as it can. So the main motive of every corporate or of every business is usually either the making money, wealth, funds, etc. When you speak about an entity which is called an NGO, not for profits, not that not for profits don't make profits, they do make profits, but the difference is that they will again utilize that profits into not for profits activities or into activities which are of
right,
charity. The working and functioning of both these organizations are different. A corporate is a very regulated framework. A corporate is a very organized and disciplined framework whereas an NGO works facing a lot of challenges which are on the human grounds. An NGO works on voluntary services which are provided to it, and therefore that human element becomes very, very important. Whereas in a corporate, whenever a service is being provided, the services can always be enumerated in terms of money. So the moment I give you a service, you pay me for that. And
But
therefore,
many NGOs hire employees.
many NGOs hire employees, but it is not the employees who do the work for them. The employees are usually hired to take care of the administrative capacities of the NGOs, not the groundwork or the voluntary capacities of the NGOs. So
Right,
for
right,
carry out the voluntary services, they will always have volunteers, as many volunteers as possible.
right,
So
right,
when you have a large framework of volunteers, a lot of these works are done on an impromptu or an impulsive manner. A lot of these are scattered and undefined work. They are done in the framework of an undefined
correct,
economy or a,
correct, correct.
right. So the problem is that reporting, for example, a corporate, especially a limited company, especially an eligible company which is eligible for a CSR, they will have reporting every quarter. Now, NGO does not have a reporting framework which is there every quarter. There are many NGOs which they have funds, but the funds are enough to meet the requirements on the field. They might not have enough funds to design a setup where the financial reporting can be immaculate. Okay. Secondly, when you speak about the regulated frameworks, for example, the three most famous NGO frameworks are: number one is trust, number two is society, and number three is a company registered under Section 8. So when you take a trust, a charitable trust, there is no such statute in India which defines or commands a trust. So the moment you incorporate a trust, the moment you draft a trust deed, you have to go and register it under a sub-registrar of revenue. It is like going and registering a property deed. Okay. Apart from it, there is no statute which regulates whatever a trust does. Although there are
What about
certain
the
local
Public
statutes.
Charitable Trusts Act in the states?
No. So you have, that's what I'm coming to. There are local statutes. For example, you have a Bombay Trust Act in Bombay, which again enumerates certain things. But you don't have a common unified code of conduct for each and every NGO as such. There's nothing
Right. Does
defined in
Delhi
it.
have a trust act
So Delhi
for
doesn't have
public
a trust.
trusts?
Delhi doesn't have any trust act. So
So
Delhi does not
public
have any.
charitable trusts operate in what way in Delhi?
So in Delhi, you can either register as a trust, you can either register as a society, and or you can incorporate a company and get a
Right.
license under.
But you don't have to comply with any charitable trust act in
So
Delhi.
if you are registered under the Societies Act, then you have to comply with the provisions of the Societies Act. If
Right.
you are registered with the Trust Act and your trust is also registered with the Income Tax Act under Section 12, you have the registration of 12A and you also have the registration of
Right.
80G, then you have to
Right.
comply with all the provisions of the Income Tax Act. That anyhow, any NGO, may it be a society or a company or a trust, has to do it if they want to get the exemptions under Section 12 and Section 80G. So those
Right.
compliances are common for all. But when I talk about for example, a company is, apart from the Income Tax Act and on the other statutes, a company is very strictly governed by the Companies Act. And those governance have a lot of reporting in there. When you speak about reporting, for example, NGOs don't have such framework. They can have their own set of conducts. For example, a trust will have a trust deed, a societies will have its memorandum, and so will the company have it. But there are no such.
Sorry, one second, one second. Anjani, I just lost you. I just lost the net connection suddenly slowed down. Yeah, if you can repeat just the last 10 seconds of
Okay.
what you were saying.
So I'm saying that, for example, the companies are governed by a very strong framework of law under the Companies Act, which have a
Right.
lot of reporting standards. For example, need to have one meeting every quarter, need to have
Right.
an filing of an AGM. When you look after the Societies Act and the Trust Act, you will not find such provisions there. To
Right.
have a meeting and report is not a compulsion. Okay, it is
Right.
both. There are societies in this thing. So you can have one AGM, you have to furnish it with the Societies Act. So therefore, the regulations are not that strong when it comes to that. Number one. So therefore, to choose the right kind of an NGO, you need to ensure that whatever NGO you are choosing, they need to have a very strong governance and reporting with them. When I talk about governance and NGOs, governance and reporting standards, I mean NGOs which have voluntary reporting. For example, an NGO is not forced to share its books of accounts, its audited accounts with the general public at large.
Right.
The moment you are furnished with the, although NGOs are the entity which are actually, they are the only entity which is working with the general public at large for the entire time. They are
Right.
the ones
Right.
who are working for the general public. So I believe that they should be under an obligation to share, specifically NGOs which have donations up to a certain level. There should be a legal obligation on them to come up with such reports. They should have an annual report from the trustees or the board or the governing body. They should have a standard of reporting, and these reporting, the audited financials, should be shared with the general public at large for
Right,
the
right,
large.
right.
Okay, so for us
So
to
this is
choose the
a
right
major problem, right?
or the implementing partners, implementing agency, it is very important. That number one, because as I told you, there are differences in cultures. So what I have experienced over the past working with certain NGOs who have got grants from the corporates, that there is
Right,
always that issue of reporting which comes in. Because corporates, they have to report in their own segment. So they have a very descriptive and they have a very detailed form of reporting, and the
right,
expenditure heads are also reported in a particular manner. Whereas NGOs, when they work on the ground level, that reporting might not fit to that kind of an NGO.
correct,
So,
correct.
there's always a disparity. There's always a bridge which is not never there. So I believe that bridge
Hmm.
has to be made, and of course there has to
Okay,
be somewhere there has to be a middle path which both of them have to come there. But from the company's perspective, they need to approach an NGO which has got good reporting standards. They have a website where they have the document, that is the basic constitution, your memorandum or the trust deed or the MOA and the articles which are listed on their website. They have an annual report. Their audited accounts are being shared with the general public on that website. They have a code of conduct for themselves. They have right internal control procedures. They have independence in the board. That is very important. The trustees are not blood related. The trustees, when they are doing the activities, there is an independence and transparency. There is a disclosure
okay.
of interest, which is very
Anjani,
important.
one second, I had lost you on the net. So these pointers are very good. If we can just revisit them, so there will be a strong voluntary reporting procedure. And what are the other points?
So strong voluntary reporting procedure, which includes the sharing of the basic constitution document of the NGO, along with annual reporting of the audited financials and the report on the activities of a trust. That is one.
Okay.
Second would be the composition of the board. That is very important.
The board of the NGO.
Board of the NGOs. It can be the board of trustees, and it should have a brief profile on the board of trustees, so that you can
Right,
come to know that who are the board of trustees, what are the credentials, the credibility can be. That's how you build up your trust. Third, there should be independence in the board. It should not be a family-run trust. It should not be something that there are 4 or 5 blood relation people who have started an NGO.
right,
Fourth should be the disclosure of interest. So if there are any kind of an activities which have been done, the disclosure of interest should always be there. The board should also, the board of trustees, the governing body of a society, or the board of directors of the company, the NGO, they should always have a disclosure of interest if they have undertaken any kind of a transaction where they were interested. Okay. Fifth would be the posting of important minutes or the AGM, sharing of
right,
that with
right,
what has been there. Okay, and then the internal control policies, the financial policies, policies with regards to donations, compliance with the other regulations, for example, FCRA,
right,
income tax, TDS. So these are certain reportings which are very important. So I believe these are certain benchmarks which every company will have to first undertake and then decide whether they are choosing a particular NGO for as an implementing agency or not.
true, true. This was extremely useful, Anjani, the pointers bit. What about any pointers for drafting a CSR policy? What is the purpose of the CSR policy? What should it include?
The CSR policy, I believe, is something which is very personal to the corporate. It changes. The CSR policy, according to me, the broad heads would be number one would be your philosophy. Whatever philosophy the corporate shares. Every corporate has a vision. So it's very important that
Right,
you define that vision in your CSR policy. So the first paragraph
right.
of the CSR policy should be the vision statement, that this is the vision which we have. The second would be the
Okay.
CSR policy itself, that is the main policy. So first becomes the
Right,
preamble. First becomes the preamble. The
right,
second is your main act. So second is basically
right,
what is it that you are going to undertake. Okay. The
right,
third will then define the budget. Okay. So the
right.
budget is very important. when see Chanakya in Chanakya Niti, he had said that Kosh Purva Sarva Arambha. That before you start anything, Kosh Purva, you need to have and you need to assess whatever money is available to you. The resources are very important. So you need to first define that. So the budgeting is
Right.
important. And then the fourth would be the expenditure. A planned expenditure, again, as per the budgeted ones, that this is where we
So
are
you
going to
suggest this should be written in the policy itself?
Yes, yes. So there would be
So the policy will refresh
four
every year,
classifications. It would be the philosophy, the vision, it would be the policy, it would be the budget, it would be the expenditure.
but budget and expenditure will basically change every year then, right?
Yes, of course. So the policy will keep revising every year.
Okay, okay.
Right.
And
And you can
inside
always
the
add it. And in the last year, the policy was this thing, and you can always add this thing that, okay, this was the policy which we had made. In the last year, we had achieved this target, and now we are revising this target to this.
okay. And inside the second section, which is the policy, what
Right.
should be included?
So in that policy, whatever you choose from Schedule 7, for example, I choose to work for the armed personals, the widows of armed personals, etc., as one of my CSR activity. So then my vision, I will already describe what the vision is. Now I will take this particular thing, the first para, I will only define that this is my policy. So
Right.
it falls under Schedule 7. This is what I've decided, and this would be the policy. So I would be taking care of the widows, opening school for the children of the widows, or contributing or creating a fund for this, helping them set up businesses for the widows of the armed personnel, helping the children of the armed personnel, etc. So then you can define each one of them at a micro level in the policy.
Okay, okay. And are there any administrative or operational provisions other than
You
the budget and expenses?
See, there is, it has not been defined what the policy would be. Now, the broad
Yeah.
heads have been brought into consideration after looking. So, if you go to the website of ITC, or for that matter, if you go to the website of Aditya Birla, you will find that the policies are right there. So, these policies, and they are all very similar. So, they have these as their pointers which are there. So, yes, some
Hmm.
of them, they also have administratives, some of them have budgets, but some of them have excluded the budget. Some of them expenditure, but some of them have excluded expenditure. So I think it's all about your corporate, how much of it. Again, as in law, you always say that uh, more the words, the more interpretations are possible. So I think the less you read is better, because then you're shooting yourself on your own foot. The moment it is out, then a lot of interpretations are possible. Then there's a larger amount of check which is there on you, because at the end of the year, when you come up with the CSR report, and if majority of the things which you have mentioned in your policy, if it is not being fulfilled, then it won't be a very heartening sign or a message for that company. So I believe initially you need to be
Conservative on the policy.
absolutely. It's better safe than never. So you go with a safe this thing. Once you understand, because for everybody it's a new challenge. So once you can understand the challenges which you will face on the ground implementing these policies, the challenges you will face from the from the litigative point of view, from the compliance point of view, from the accounting point of view, from the reporting point of view, from collaborating with certain partners, from collaborating with the implementing agencies. I believe only then you are in a position to keep expanding the horizons of your policies, to making it more micro than macro in the approach. I think that should be
Right.
a of the
I get it.
organization.
All
See,
right, this has
ultimately, what I
been, yeah,
feel
tell
is
me, tell me.
see, ultimately, it is the impact. Just to, I believe we are closing, or you have any other question which is being left?
No, this is the last question.
Last. So I believe, see, what really matters is that the impact of the CSR should be important. As when I began, I told you that philanthropy is not new to India, or it is
Right,
not even new to the Indian companies. But
right.
ultimately, the impact of what you do is very important. So majority of, see, when you do a CSR, if you do it just as a business expenditure, now you might be carrying out certain things where you are not compliant with the provisions, you are embezzling fund, you are also doing tax evasion, but you are also, because it's a mandate, you are also expending that 2%. What kind of that
Right.
impact that 2% will have? What I believe is the intention is to create a positive impact on the society. Just to close it, I remember this story from the ancient times. So there was this king called Indradumna. So Indradumna was a very old king from the era of Mahabharata, and he was known for his charitable activities. So he would do a lot of CSR as a king. And again, as I told you, it has always been there in our bloods. So Indradumna was the son of Bharat. Bharat was the first king. When you
Right.
if you read Mahabharata, Bharat was the first king. So
Right.
Indradumna, he did so many charitable activities that he was, once he died, he went to heaven and he was enjoying his time in heaven. So after a couple of 100 years, the king of heaven, Indra, he came to Indradumna and he told him that, see, son, your whatever charitable activities you had done, the balance sheet is fulfilled now. Your assets and liabilities are equal. So it's time that you leave the indulgence of heaven and you need to go back to the earth. So
Right.
Indradumna was very confused. He said that, see, all my life I did so many charitable activities. I built schools, I built religious places, I gave cows and this and that. How can you say that it can't get over so soon? So Indra tells him that, see, the problem is that now if you go down on earth, okay, I let me give you this but leverage that you go down on earth, you meet people. If you meet even one single living being on the earth who can vouch that yes, you have done certain charitable activities, that who remembers your CSR, then I will call you back to the heaven. So he goes to Earth and he's traveling around. He sees that everything has changed on Earth. So whatever he had built, he couldn't even find the buildings where they were. There were wars and God knows what happened. So he finally goes to this sage. His name was Markande, and Markande is called Chiranjeevi. He would never die. So he goes to Markande and he asks Markande that, do you remember me? I am Indradumna, and do you remember any of the deeds which I have done? So Markandeya just looked at him blankly and he tells him that, son, I don't remember anything. So you do
Okay.
one thing. If you think that I can think of one person who would know it, so then he sends him to an owl. He says that owl is a wise creature and that owl has lived longer than me. Go to that owl. So he goes to the owl. When he goes to the owl, owl says the same thing, that I don't remember. So owl sends him to a crane. That there is this crane in a lake. You go there. He goes to the crane. So the crane tells him that, okay, see, I don't know, but I know the oldest creature in this world. That's a tortoise, and that tortoise name is Akupada. So Akupada was the king of turtles. So he sends
Right.
him to the king of turtles, Akupada. So the king goes to this turtle, and suddenly the news is sent to Akupada, and he's sitting on a shore of a lake. The moment he reaches there, Akupada sees the king and he starts crying. He cries like anything. He sobs, and he sobs and he hugs the king and he asks, and he suddenly tells him that, oh Indradumna, I'm so blessed that you are here. So Indradumna asks him that, how do you remember me? So he says that, come on, everybody knows you. In my lake, all the organisms in my lake, they know you. All the turtles, they know you. And he says, how? So they say that we know you as the great king Indradumna who did a lot of CSR. And
Okay.
so he said that, how? What CSR did I do? So they say that this lake, it has been made by you. So the king says that, I don't even remember making a lake. I don't think so. I had no power to make a lake. How did I make the lake? So he said that this was the impact of your CSR. He said that because you gave a lot of cattle as charity, you gave a lot of cows and buffaloes and herds and goats, etc. Now this was the area which was taken by the shepherds and they would use it as a pastures. So they would take the cows from here. Because of the hooves, because of the impact of the hooves on the ground, the sand and the dust got unsettled and there was a gorge which was created in this area. And because of the rainwater, when it collected in this gorge, it became a huge lake. Now, over centuries, this lake has given, it is the source of life and water for all the organisms. And so, therefore, it was the impact of your CSR that we all remember you because we are alive because of you. So, it's fact. And King Indradumna, quickly there was a divine plane which comes in and he's suddenly quickly called back to heaven. And if you interestingly, this lake exists in this country. If you go to Jagannath Puri,
Okay.
near
Okay.
2.7 kilometers from Jagannath Puri, there's a Gudichala temple, and near that Gudichala temple you have this lake called the Indradumna Sarovar, and that
Okay.
the turtles I'm talking about are not very far away from there. When you visit the nearby beaches where you have the famous Ridley Scott turtles which are there. So these are the Ridley
Right.
Scott turtles which are the Agupada at that point of time. So at the end, it is basically the impact of the CSR which has to be measured. So whatever you have undertaken, if the impact is there, then I believe the CSR is a success when it comes to that.
Right. 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 This was absolutely wonderful, Anjani,
Yeah,
and
thank
I'm
you.
sure
Raghav.
this
Thank
will
you.
be very helpful for all our students.
Definitely, no, it was a pleasure communicating that. Thank you.
Thanks, Anjani, and we'll be inviting you again for more sessions,
Definitely,
including. So,
anytime.
thanks, and
All good. Thank you, thank you.
yeah,
It was absolute pleasure. Thank you so
I hope
much.
you enjoyed this. Yeah, okay. Thanks. Yeah,
Thank you.
bye.